Rookie fever is hitting us all. Jeff Bell and I have taken some rookies and some veterans in Dynasty that have similar trade value. We're going to play a fun little game of this or that, talking about these guys who are side by side in our Dan Hindery's trade value chart. So let's go ahead and kick it off, Jeff. Cam Ward or Dak Prescott, who do you prefer in Dynasty?
I'm taking Cam Ward. I'm taking the rolling dice. I mean, I don't know. I understand the argument and Dak Prescott being the potential upside there, obviously with CeeDee Lamb, with whatever the Cowboys are otherwise able to put together on offense. I think that this is an opportunity to roll the dice on Cam Ward, the 101 of the NFL draft. And yeah, you might be a little bit nervous about landing in Tennessee, about the pieces that might be around him. I mean, Calvin Ridley maybe gets him there, but it's the argument would be that if Cam Ward is good at all, you're never going to be able to get this deal done again.
That's a good point. I do lean towards Dak Prescott here. And Jeff, this reminds me of a trade that you and I made last offseason. I can't remember the details of the trade, but it was a trade where you sent Dak Prescott and I acquired Dak Prescott. So I think our disagreement here just has much more to do with how we feel about the future of Dak Prescott. I look at him, still 31 years old. We are regularly seeing quarterbacks play now into their mid to late 30s. So when on the field, we have seen Dak Prescott can give us, as high as overall QB1 production. Yeah, I know that was 6 years ago, but it is in the range of outcomes. And we've seen that his floor is kind of QB12, QB15. So I am pretty happy if I'm getting that production from him, but I totally understand the upside case for Cam Ward. And, I do like Cam Ward quite a bit. I just, we've already seen Dak Prescott check the boxes of being a productive NFL player. So I would go with him there, but this is a good start to the show. A little disagreement. It would be boring if you and I were just bobbleheads, just shaking our heads to every single take. What is it, Jeff?
I remember that trade though. It was I got CJ Stroud and you got basically the principles where I got CJ Stroud and you got Dak Prescott and what turned out to be the 112 because I won the league. So
that's right. And is that the league that I left? Maybe
that is the league you left, Dave.
I think so.
Never leave dynasty leagues. You cannot leave a dynasty league.
The one league that I've left, and let's save the story for the end of the show. We're too early in the show to go completely off the rails. This or that, Jeff. Shedeur Sanders or Geno Smith. And I love this one. Not only are they right next to each other in Dan Hindery's trade chart, but they're kind of similar players. Like you could also almost maybe use Geno Smith as a player comp for Shedeur Sanders. But who do you prefer here?
I'm going to take Shedeur Sanders. I'm going to roll the dice on Shedeur Sanders hitting and recognizing that upside. I think Geno Smith it's kind of frustrating to me in fantasy because, well, at least last year he didn't get the touchdowns. He got the yards, but he was never quite clipping in those top 12 type quarterback weeks because the touchdowns weren't quite there. He didn't really get the rushing like you might want to hope. And so I think that Shedeur, I'm going to roll the dice. And I think it was interesting. There was a comment that Shedeur made where he was talking about his pocket play and how he was so heavy in the pocket in college. And I think that the narrative around him has been he's just a pocket passer. And he kind of let slip that he was not really asked and not really thought of running the ball. And I think that right now, when you look at where he's kind of being valued in Dynasty, where we're kind of viewing him in the draft, if he were to add running onto that, you're looking at a great value relative to where you're getting him.
Now, I'm not saying that they're comparable athletes at all, but I remember Justin Fields when he came into the league. People were saying, well, he didn't rush in college, so he's not going to be able to rush in the NFL. And you and I were the ones like screaming from the mountaintops, like, have you seen this guy play? He's one of the most athletic players on the football field. And sure enough, he comes out and running all over the field. Now, Shedeur Sanders is never going to be a 1,000-yard rusher, but if you can get an extra 400, 500, 600 yards of rushing, I think that's realistic that we could expect from Shedeur Sanders in the NFL, and that would be a huge boom to his fantasy value. So I'm in agreement with you on this one. I prefer Shedeur Sanders over Geno Smith. Real quickly, put on your hypothetical hat for a second. In my recent mock draft, Jeff, just came out yesterday morning, I had Shedeur Sanders going to the Raiders at 6. Now, if Shedeur Sanders landed with the Raiders, I'm assuming you'd definitely prefer him over Geno Smith, right? Because that kind of means that probably only looking at a year or less of Geno Smith.
Well, hypothetically, yes, but I think he's going to go to 2 to the Browns. So
that's what it's looking like. And yeah, if he's going 2 overall, I mean, then it's not comparing him to Geno Smith. Then it's wondering, are we drafting him ahead of Ashton Jeanty in our rookie draft? So the value can change for Shedeur Sanders very quickly, depending on where he lands. This is a really fun one, Jeff, and I know where I'm going easily on this one. But Ashton Jeanty or Devon Achane side by side in the trade value chart, who do you prefer here?
Jeanty. I'm gonna swing on the generational upside, quote unquote, of Ashton Jeanty, but I mean, you're playing that game. You need a good landing spot. You're waiting to see where he ends up. If he lands somewhere that he is splitting some carries, something like that, that would be frustrating. And Devin Achane, we saw some of the big games and the production that he's capable of already, but I think that it's the type of thing. If Jeanty hits, he's just going to be valued at a completely different level than Devin Achane would be, and I think that anybody that has Achane right now would happily spin him off for Ashton Jeanty.
I agree. And one of my least favorite things about Dynasty is when I really, really like a player, but then his value gets so inflated that I have to not talk poorly about him, but kind of change my take. And Devon Achane, I was gushing over him when he was falling into the late second in rookie drafts. And you look at that pairing with Miami. I mean, it was just a match made in heaven, a guy who can get outside and rip off big plays. And that happened his rookie season. And then in year two, he wasn't the same rusher, but then he made up for it with just an absurd target volume. I mean, he was basically the wide receiver one for Miami last year. But looking at both of those situations, his rookie season, the breakaway run rate that we've never seen in NFL history, and then in year two, him getting more targets than any other running back in the league, I can't help but feel like he might be a product of this Miami offense. And if you were to pick him up and put him on a different offense, or if Mike McDaniel left, I don't know if you'd be looking at the same production. So for me, it's just in a vacuum. I think that Jeanty is the better running back, and that's what I would want to bet on here. Sticking with the running back theme, and this is kind of fun the way this worked out. Jeanty and Achane, two guys that are a little bit undersized. And then you look at two guys like Omarion, Hampton, and Breece Hall, who are very similar in value right now in dynasty leagues. Two guys with very similar profiles as well when it comes to the size, speed, things of that nature. Who do you prefer here, Jeff? Omarion Hampton or Breece Hall? I don't know if you saw the comments yesterday. Aaron Glenn saying that he sees Breece Hall as part of a three-headed committee in that backfield in New York.
Boy, Dave, I didn't see those comments before I was going to answer this thing, but
Said it's going to be a 1-2-3 backfield in New York.
I don't like that. I don't like that
No.
at all. No. And that's where it sucked, because I was going to say Breece Hall, because I did think he was being a little bit underrated relative to what we saw, the upside, and to end the 2023 season. He was really a league winner down the stretch at the end of 2023. But yeah, you're telling me he's going to those rookie guys, Isaiah Davis, that's who's gonna be in three-headed backfield. Who's the other? Braylon
Isaiah
Allen
Davis and Braylon Allen. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and Justin Fields too. I mean, are they even going to give the ball to Breece Hall? That's going to be an open question. But Omarion Hampton, I think there's so much steam right now for him being a first-round player, and you see him fall down a little bit. That means a pretty good team potentially grabbing him in the first round, or he goes high and he's really going to be having that value. And I think that at this point, given the steam on Omarion Hampton being a first round pick, and some people even having him above Ashton Jeanty, I think you got to make that play after hearing this shocking news that Isaiah Davis is going to get carries over Breece Hall. So.
Well, for whatever reason, man, the Jets just haven't seemed to respect Breece Hall throughout his tenure. Like, they use him as kind of a secondary back, a scat back. It's kind of weird the usage he gets. Like, his rookie season before the injury, it was just all kind of passing down work, and that's what got us really excited because we like that for fantasy. Then in year two, he comes out and looks a little bit better, and then in year three, he's kind of struggling to see the field. It's been a weird arc to Breece Hall's career so far. So I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth here. One, I think that Breece Hall is a good value right now. And I think that, valued on keep trade cut. Last I checked, he was RB6 or RB7, I believe. I think that's undervalued for Breece Hall. But I'd also prefer Omarion Hampton for the reasons you talked about. You start looking at mock drafts, him falling into the late first. Denver, Los Angeles, Kansas City. There's a lot of really good landing spots for Hampton. So I would roll the dice on Hampton here. But I also think that Breece Hall makes for a decent buy low if you're able to get him. Let's stick with the running backs, and I got one more.
We're gonna see Breece Hall get the Saquon Barkley treatment, or they're gonna split it up, and then he's gonna hit free agency, and then like the Chiefs are gonna sign him, and it's gonna be like, oh well, what do we have here?
I mean, another one of the wild scenarios that I've seen getting floated around there is that the Jets at 7 draft Ashton Jeanty and then immediately after try to trade Breece Hall for a day 2 pick potentially. So there's a lot of ways that this can shake out. But basically, what I'm getting at, again, talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but what I'm getting at is that Breece Hall is still a talented player and he's still young. I mean, this is a guy who gave us an RB2 season coming off of a torn ACL, just a good player, an athletic player, not in the best landing spot right now, but we know those landing spots can change. So let's go one more running back, this or that here that I want to talk about. RJ Harvey or JK Dobbins. Who are you going with here?
JK Dobbins on a team, Dave?
He is not. He is a free agent, but still relatively youngish as far as running backs go, and a lot of running back needy teams out there coming off of a season where it looked like the injury was kind of behind him. But who do you prefer here, Jeff? We're definitely getting a little bit further down the rankings than we were talking about Ashton Jeanty and Omarion Hampton.
I'm taking RJ Harvey. I'm going to roll the dice there. I think that he's going to. It's a risk because you're looking at. I mean, he could end up running back 22 in this class. We don't know where he's going to end up, but at the same time, I think you see the explosion that he showcased his testing. I think that gives you a pretty good feeling that he's going to be in the mix for a day 2 landing spot. He's just going to be viewed completely different relative to the value of him versus J.K. Dobbins. Unfortunately, even with the strong year last year, given the injury that Dobbins or the injuries that Dobbins has overcome, I don't think you're ever going to see a team anymore at this point, especially at 26 years old, decide that he's going to be their back for the next couple of years. You're kind of landing in 1 year, one off type of deals. Whereas RJ Harvey, I mean, it could be nothing, or it could be hitting the upside on a day 2 player that really locks into a high value role.
It's clearly RJ Harvey for me. I prefer him much more than JK Dobbins. I don't know if you got your rankings pulled up, Jeff, right now, but curious where you have RJ Harvey. I've got the same top 5 just about everybody has: Ashton Jeanty, Travion Henderson, Omarion Hampton, Quinshon Judkins, and Caleb Johnson. Everybody's kind of got them in their own order, but I think the rankings really start at RB6 and beyond because those guys are so flat. I have moved RJ Harvey atop of that tier 2, tier 3, whatever you want to call it. I've moved him ahead of Cam Scattaboo, ahead of Devin Neal. I have RJ Harvey as my RB6 in this class just because of the explosiveness that you mentioned. You know, last year, 31 FBS running backs had 200 plus carries. RJ Harvey was second in yards per attempt. He was second in rushes of 10 plus yards. He was second in rushes of 15 plus yards. You can guess who was first in all those categories. A guy named Ashton Jeanty, who you may have heard of. Third in touchdowns, fourth in breakaway run rate, fifth in yards, sixth in yards per route run, eighth in missed tackles, ninth in yards after contact per attempt. I mean, you look at this guy's efficiency profile, and he was just a freak last year at UCF. So I look at that big play upside for a guy like RJ Harvey, and I will absolutely roll the dice on that profile in Dynasty.
He's my running back 6 in the class, so it tells you I'm right there as well.
Yep. Finally moved him ahead of Camp Scattaboo after Scattaboo came out and had his pretty underwhelming 40 time that we all expected and then double counted against him. All right, let's switch to wide receivers here. And we got to talk about the guy atop the list right now, the consensus wide receiver 1, Tet McMillan. Pretty polarizing for the guy who's the consensus wide receiver 1. Some people are saying he's a top 10 pick. Some people are saying he's a late first pick. But Dan Hendry, in his trade value chart, has Tet McMillan right alongside Xavier Worthy. Jeff, who do you prefer between these two?
Xavier Worthy. Give me Xavier Worthy relatively easily. We saw the breakout last year, especially towards through the Super Bowl, but the second half of last year, tethered to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, the upside is so high there for Worthy. This could be a player that could be in the Tyreek Hill stratosphere this year in terms of what is capable of playing with Mahomes. And so I definitely am taking Worthy over Tet McMillan.
And I think the one thing you can kind of use it as a pro or a con when talking about Xavier Worthy is how many big plays he left on the field, whether it was concentration or drops or just not getting that separation at the top of his route. Again, you can look at this as a good or a bad. Like, you know, he's got room for improvement, or maybe he just isn't that guy. Either way, I want to look at it, though, on the, you know, there's room for improvement here. And we already saw him break out over the final few weeks of the season. And I think once you add a guy like Rashee Rice in the mix, that just makes him even better. A guy who is a consistent underneath target that defenses have to focus on is just going to help them open up that deep ball even more. So I'm with you as well, Xavier Worthy here. Now, this one's tough for me. This or that we're going to talk about here. Matthew Golden has been shooting up draft boards after logging the fastest 40 time of any wide receiver at the combine. Matthew Golden or Jaylen Waddle, Jeff?
Jaylen Waddle. Give me Jaylen Waddle. I know that there's been some disappointment relative to where he's been valued, but we see Tyreek Hill's name popping up in trade rumors, and Tyreek Hill seems to be on Twitter every single time there's a trade rumor, kind of saying, "I know something you don't know," almost. And if that were to go down, I mean, we saw rookie year Jaylen Waddle, the way that he was targeted from Tua Tagovailoa. I think that you could be looking at a massive, massive target upside for Jaylen Waddle. And Golden, I like him quite a bit. It saw a little bit all over the board on, I think, that where he's going to end up. And I know Daniel Jeremiah's got him as wide receiver 1 in the class for him. Other people aren't quite that high. But I think the breakout potential is certainly there. But I think you're looking more as wide receiver 2 within an offensive scheme. And I mean, Jaylen Waddle is also right now a wide receiver 2 within an offensive scheme. And he's still young enough to have a proven track record relative to swinging on Matthew Golden.
Yeah, and I do like Matthew Golden. He's been a riser for me as well. And in my most recent mock draft, I had him going to the Cowboys at 12, which would make this decision a little bit harder if he does garner that sort of draft capital. But as it stands right now, I prefer Jaylen Waddle as well. I recently talked about Jaylen Waddle on the Fantasy Football Show with Alfredo Brown when we were talking about some dynasty buys. It's crazy to me. Jaylen Waddle's still just 26 years old. They've got him under contract through 2027 on a pretty hefty deal here. But really, what it comes down to is just how much he has been injured. Like, we saw this guy kind of do both things we want to see from a wide receiver. Rookie season, he was a target hog, and then in year 2, Tyreek Hill shows up. He sees the target share dwindle a little bit. But then he put up some of the best efficiency in the league, and we wanted to see those two things marry. Like, can he bring in the targets while still getting the efficiency? And he's just been injured. I mean, just over the last 2 years alone, ankle sprain, knee strain, concussion, sternum bruise. That doesn't even count all the times that he has just gone into the tent and then come back in the game and been just kind of a decoy for the rest of the game. It also doesn't count all the times that Tua Tagovailoa has left with injuries of his own. So Jaylen Waddle, a good player who has dealt with injuries to him and his quarterback over the last couple of years, still just 26 years old. I'm going with Waddle as well. Jeff, here's another fun one. Emeka Egbuka or Brandon Aiyuk? Who do you prefer?
Give me Brandon Aiyuk. And I feel like Brandon Aiyuk is being slept on a bit, but when you look at Deebo Samuel now gone out of that 49ers offense, I mean, Aiyuk, we were expecting massive things last year, obviously had the injuries and that knocked him down. They really need him to be that type of a player. I know we saw Juwan Jennings have a big season last year. We've seen Ricky Pearsall in flashes. Aiyuk is the only player that in that offense that's capable of being a true wide receiver 1. And I think that you can make the argument that while the 49ers have done a fantastic job of scheming the ball around, Aiyuk also has that potential to be that target hog and be that player that really does have a ton of targets and is a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. Egbuka, I like him quite a bit. Certainly a Buckeye, and that kind of wins extra points for me. But you're dealing with the unknown. You're dealing with, is he going to be a first round pick? Is he going to be a second round pick? What offense is he going to land in? Is he going to be stuck as the wide receiver 2 in a run first offense? And you're kind of, what are you dealing with there? I think I'm just going to take a little bit of certainty with Brandon Aiyuk.
Yeah, and I think now that we have reports, which we always get these reports in like February and March, where every injured player is on track to play in week 1. But that was a pretty early season injury that Brandon Aiyuk had, and he does have youth on his size. I mean, not the youngest guy, but tore his ACL at 26 years old, and now going into his age 27 season. We can see him bounce back. And something I have taken notice of over the years, and we just talked about this recently internally at Football Guys, was that wide receivers don't really see that dip in production coming off of an ACL anymore. It used to be that these players, it would take 2-3 years for them to come back from an ACL. And we still do see that with running backs. But when it comes to wide receivers, a lot of these guys come back the year after a clean ACL tear and just immediately play like they did pre-injury. So like you said, Brandon Aiyuk, he's the guy that kind of profiles to be the wide receiver 1 here. And if it doesn't pan out in San Francisco, there have been trade rumors. They want to open up the cap for Brock Purdy. I mean, like, can it get much worse than where he is right now? They can send him to Washington, where he can be the wide receiver 1 for Jaden Daniels. There's a lot of ways where this can break even better than it currently is. Brandon Aiyuk, Talented player, still 27 years old. I would also take him over Egbuka. Now we're still working our way down a little bit. Travis Hunter or Mike Evans, Jeff? Who do you prefer here?
Travis Hunter all day. Give me Travis Hunter. I think he's just being undervalued relative to where the upside is, where he can realize. And I mean, Mike Evans, sure, we can ink it in for 1,000 yards. But at this point, if you can trade Mike Evans for Travis Hunter, do that deal immediately.
Yeah, and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Like, I don't see any world where Travis Hunter doesn't shoot up rookie draft boards after the draft. Right now, it's just the uncertainty that has people scared. But I think that we're going to see him start to move up before the draft. Jeff, I don't know if you saw our friend Matt Harmon, Reception Perception, just finished charting Travis Hunter, and he got the Christmas tree green on every single route. I mean, this guy really can do it all, and it's something you've talked about. Even if he does get snaps at cornerback, kind of full time, even if he's only getting 12 to 15 snaps per game, if they're using him on pass heavy situations where he's going to be the primary target in the first read, he could still end up on a very limited offensive workload, end up with 8 to 10 targets per game. So Travis Hunter was a guy that I was a little bit lower on early in the process, and I've been moving him up quite a bit. I am with you. I prefer Travis Hunter over Mike Evans.
I
All right,
did
we got
see
two. Yeah.
I did see on socials today, yeah, that it was the official of I've looked at every single prospect in this class, and Travis Hunter was my wide receiver 7, but now because Matt Harmon dropped this, he is now wide receiver 1, Travis Hunter, and it was the unofficial day, and it tells me that everybody needs spring and everybody needs to get outside.
Well, to be fair, when you look at the top guys in this class, the top wide receivers, they are pretty flat. So, like saying that, I'm not justifying it, but saying that you move a guy from wide receiver 7 to wide receiver 3 might sound like a huge move in rankings, but with this class, that really isn't saying all that much. Let's keep moving down the rankings a little bit in this rookie class. And these guys also, two very similar guys with similar builds and similar athletic profiles. Trey Harris or Michael Pittman, who do you prefer?
Boy, I'm the world's foremost Michael Pittman hater, but yeah, I'm going to take Trey Harris. I'm going to roll the dice
Yeah.
on Trey Harris. Kind of working out here. I just think Pittman is what it is. I don't know. And I think last year you kind of saw Josh Downs maybe position himself to take over as the wide receiver 1 within that offense, just because you can do a whole lot of different things with Josh Downs relative to Michael Pittman, just kind of running those 11-yard digs over and over again and getting tackled when he catches the ball. But no, I think I'll just swing here for the fences with Trey Harris.
Dude, Travis Hunter, or not, I don't know where Travis Hunter even came out of my mouth. Michael Pittman. The league moves fast, man. Like, he was not a young guy when he was drafted and then lost a lot of his rookie season to injury. Michael Pittman feels like a guy who's only been in the league for a handful of years. He's already going into his age 28 season, and he's got that contract, which should insulate his value a little bit. If you remember last offseason, 3 years, $70 million, but they've got an out after this year. And if Michael Pittman hits free agency as an underperforming 29-year-old, there might not be much of a market for him. Trey Harris by a landslide for me. I'm not going to bore the audience more with me gushing about Trey Harris. He's a guy that I really, really like. Analytically, he has probably one of the best efficiency profiles in this class, but then you look at his body control and his ability to tack the ball in the air. Big fan of Trey Harris. I think he might even be lucky enough to sneak in and get some round 1 draft capital here. We'll see how that shakes out in about a month. One more this or that I want to talk about here, Jeff, in regards to wide receivers, and then we got a couple tight ends that we'll talk about here. But Jaylen Noel out of Iowa State or Darnell Mooney, who really had himself a nice little renaissance last year in Atlanta.
I was banging the drum hard for Darnell Mooney last year, and I really enjoyed that. But again, I'll take Jaylen Noel, and we'll see how that one goes. Just going to roll the dice here. I think Mooney, I mean, you're dealing with last year's probably the ceiling. You're talking about a player that can scrape together maybe 1,000 yards, maybe get to 6 to 8 touchdowns. Maybe if everything works well, it's one of those that you're probably starting him on bye weeks. Are you feeling good with, are you building a dynasty lineup that's going to put Darnell Mooney in it week after week? Whereas Noel, you're rolling the dice that he lands somewhere that his whole skill set is able to be exploited and unlocked.
Yeah, and he's been a riser for a lot of people. I'm a big fan of Jaylen Noel. As soon as I started watching him, he's just one of those guys that jumps off the screen when you watch him. And I've made the Golden Tate comp a handful of times on this show, but that's what I see when I watch him. And I think you hit the nail on the head with Darnell Mooney. He's not a bad football player by any means, but we know what he is at this point. And if everything breaks right, like if he gets a lot of touchdowns and catch rate through the roof and gets a handful of broken plays, you're getting 1,000 yards and a handful of touchdowns, but that's kind of the ceiling for Darnell Mooney. And in order for him to hit that ceiling, like we saw in years past, he either needs to have no target competition like he had in Chicago, or he needs to be playing with Kirk Cousins, throwing 70 balls a game. So it's a pretty narrow path for Darnell Mooney to be a guy that you want to be starting in Dynasty. Let's move on. And normally, we keep the tight end segments on the show pretty tight, but this is a deep rookie class, and there are some really good tight ends here. So let's start off. This kind of sounds crazy to be making this comparison already, but Tyler Warren or TJ Hockenson, who do you prefer, Jeff?
Tyler Warren. Let's roll it. Let's roll the dice on the upside again. I think that's where you don't know what this Minnesota offense is going to look like with JJ McCarthy stepping in there. It's going to be through Justin Jefferson, and Jordan Addison. You don't know. I mean, certainly Sam Darnold was able to make it work last year, and JJ McCarthy at his ceiling could probably be as good as Sam Darnold's, but we just don't. There's a lot of uncertainty with that. And Tyler Warren, you're talking about a player that's regularly getting mocked in the top 10 of the draft. And so that's I'll roll the dice on that rookie that can have the high upside.
This one is tough for me because I love Tyler Warren, and I've got him mocked going 7th overall. I'd be shocked to see him fall outside of the top 10. And TJ Hockenson was a guy early in his career that I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of, but I'll say the same thing about TJ Hockenson that we just talked about with Darnell Mooney. Playing with Kirk Cousins, man, it can cover up a lot of warts. It seems like Kirk Cousins has always been on these teams where they just have bad defenses and he is forced to air it out. And TJ Hockenson was a massive beneficiary of that. But TJ Hockenson has never been that game breaking athlete. He's a guy who can really work as that safety valve underneath and he can suck in a lot of targets, but he's never going to be ripping off the big plays. He's never going to be mossing guys in the end zone. And I think when you look at the upside case for Tyler Warren, the upside for him is much higher than TJ Hockenson. This is a tough one for me because Hockenson is still relatively young in terms of tight ends, at 27 years old. But, Tyler Warren's coming in at 24 years old. The age is tight. I'm talking in circles here. I got to make a decision. I think I'll go with Tyler Warren, but this is a tough one. This is a really tough one. Sticking with the tight ends, Jeff, Colston Loveland or George Kittle?
I mean, this is obviously a dynasty show, and we're obviously leaning towards the youth, but I do think that just illustrative, I think it's important for people to understand the valuation relative to vets and these young players. But I'm going to take Colston Loveland here just because, again, a player that's routinely getting talked about being top 20 in the draft, you're rolling the dice, and you might never become George Kittle. And yeah, I don't want to. One, I do defer to getting out before too soon relative to too late when I play Dynasty. I am that type of player. But two, I think that you recognize the upside with Loveland. You're locking that in for 10 years as a tight end one, whereas Kittle will probably never slow down because he's just George Kittle. But at the same 3 to 5 years at the most, probably at this point.
And that's it. I mean, we did see, behind only Brock Bowers, George Kittle was the tight end 2 this year. Like, he still absolutely has it, but now going into his age 32 season, we've already talked a little bit on this show about how they're going to have to, save some money to pay Brock Purdy, and maybe that means a trade to George Kittle. And I think that George Kittle is one of those guys, very good athlete, but where he's at in this Kyle Shanahan offense maximizes his skill set so much that if he were to go somewhere else to kind of finish his career, we probably wouldn't see that elite usage and production that he benefits from in San Francisco. So I'm going to go with Colston Loveland here, especially because almost every mock draft now has him going in round 1, and getting a round 1 tight end is a pretty safe bet. So we're leaning towards the youngins here, Jeff. Let's see if maybe this last one that we could talk about, though, one more tight end, this or that. Let's see if maybe here we prefer the veteran. Mason Taylor or Evan Engram?
Give me Mason Taylor, a player that I think is going to be a first round pick. And I think that it just speaks to the way that the tight end position has changed over really the last year or two, that you've just got a lot of depth now at the tight end position. And it used to be the running joke that tight end was deep, and it really wasn't deep. I think tight end's a little bit deep now. And so I think that teams have kind of figured out how to utilize these different players. And I'll just swing on the upside versus I mean, yeah, maybe Evan Engram is the Joker in Sean Payton's offense, and he
No.
just gets 100 catches. But I think we've seen the very best of Evan Engram that we are going to see. And again, I think Mason Taylor, said it before, I think he's a player that's getting slept on a little bit when it comes to the dynasty, the fantasy community. I'm going to swing that dice on, I think, a player that is going to go in the first round.
Can we just peel back that Joker comment a little bit? I know you were a little bit tongue in cheek, but people really think that. And I think when Sean Payton talks about this Joker role, you look back at the guys that he's used in that. It's been Alvin Kamara, Jimmy Graham, these guys that are just outlier athletes. Evan Engram at this point in his career, 31 years old, well, about to be 31 years old. He's just kind of a big power slot at this point. He's had the injury history that has zapped away some of his explosiveness. I think that he makes for a great safe target across the middle of the field, but he's not a guy that you're going to be sending on end arounds and screens and things of that nature. Evan Engram, good football player, and he's had himself a nice career so far, but I'm absolutely going to Mason Taylor here, a guy who has been shooting up my draft board. I've been mocking him in round 1. I expect him to go there. Still just 20 years old, too. I mean, has a lot of room to grow and develop. So I'm going Mason Taylor as well, Jeff. You want to, before we wrap up here, you want to sneak in the story? I actually do want to tell the story about how I left this Dynasty League and see what people in the comments have to say about this. Jeff, you were in this league. It's a league that I've been in for a long time. Had a situation on a Sunday morning. I was in the middle of making breakfast and somebody sent a trade to me. And I said, ooh, I like that trade. And I accepted that trade. Immediately after the trade was accepted, I realized I had it flip-flopped. What I thought I was getting, I was actually giving away. It's happened to everybody. I reach out to the manager who sent the trade immediately. Like this wasn't, weeks later. Immediately I say, hey man, I misread that trade. Is there any way you could switch this back? And he said, no. All right, no big deal. The next day, I say, hey, man, just wanted to check in again. Is there any way we can switch this deal? And he said, no, you got to learn to live with your mistakes. So I paid that year's dues. I found a new manager, and I stepped out of the league. Jeff, you and I haven't even talked about this. Was I in the wrong for doing that?
No. I don't think you. I don't. I'm a core believer that if you think something's wrong in a league, if you just don't want to play in the league anymore, life is too short. And I think that more often than not, you end up with people that feel obligated to stay in dynasty leagues because they think that that's what you're supposed to do. Now, to be clear, don't be out here joining league in one year and then bounce after that. Don't do that over and over again. But if you've been in league for a couple years and you've kind of seen the direction, maybe it doesn't have as much trade action as you would like, or maybe you've just decided that your life has changed. It happens. And so I think that if you feel aggrieved in a league, instead of throwing a massive fit on the league message board, just leave and let somebody else step in there. I know I've been in positions where our friend Ryan McDowell invited me to his kitchen sink league, and I was very honored to play in it. I played in it for a couple of years, and then I kind of said, given where my schedule is, where my availability is right now, there's going to be somebody out there that's going to be really thrilled to get this invitation. I'm going to step out of this league and allow somebody else that opportunity. And so I think that that's just looking at evaluating your leagues. I think it's a really healthy thing, because it is, once you go down dynasty, it's really easy to get into a whole bunch of leagues. And especially if you get on social media and you start joining startups, and all of a sudden you've got 25 leagues, and it's not like anybody sitting in this chair right now has ever felt like they've had 25 leagues. But sometimes you do have to peel back, make tough decisions, recognize that I don't really enjoy this league, or it's not quite what I thought it was going to be. And I'm upset and I'm frustrated, and I don't really enjoy the way that this has gone.
Yeah, and not that I'm the doing these things perfectly. I make mistakes, but I think that the way that I went about it, one, it was a good roster. This is a championship ready roster. I'm not throwing out some team with Ben Roethlisberger,
so I'm going to win the
quarterback out there.
Game, so
well, you won the championship.
I think I've lost like 2 games in the last 3 years in this league.
It was a good team. I had a lot of draft capital. I paid for this year's dues, And I found a guy who was fired up to take over the team, Colton Dodgson, one of our new staffers here at Football Guys. Colton, make my team proud. Beat Jeff in the championship this year. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Jeff and I, we're going to be doing this every Tuesday and Thursday. So we got today's episode doing the this or that, rookies or veterans. But come back on Thursday on the YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you see that episode when we come back to talk about some of the wildest values that we are currently seeing in crowdsource dynasty rankings. So want to thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on Thursday.